Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this Royal Collection Trust digital lecture, Robert Burns in the Royal Collection, taking place here in the Great Gallery at the Palace of Holyroodhouse, Edinburgh. My name is Chris Walker, Learning Manager here at the Palace, and tonight I'm going to be joined by two special guests. Emma Stead is the curator here, and we'll be discussing the history of Robert Burns in the collection, the visit of George IV to Scotland, and the creation of a particularly special object made for that visit. We're also joined this evening by Keith Mullins-McIntyre, one of our Palace wardens who has a true passion for Burns and will be reciting one of his most famous works, Tam O'Shanter, in full for us a little later. I'll just take a moment to remind everyone that captions are enabled for this event. You can select to show or hide captions using the button at the bottom of your screen. And if you are facing any technical issues, please use the chat function to contact us and we'll do the best to advise. Likewise, if you have any questions for our speakers, please submit them in the chat and our guests will answer as many of them as we can at the end of the event. Before I hand over to Emma, it's probably best I give a very brief introduction to Robert Burns. As you're no doubt aware, Burns is considered one of the finest poets ever to hail from Scotland, and many of his works have entered the public imagination. Born in 1759, Burns led a relatively short but incredibly storied life. Both a poet and a lyricist, he saw his work broadly acclaimed within his own lifetime, and he would go on to be highly influential on later poets such as Keats, Wordsworth, and Shelley. Such is his influence that even today, January the 25th, the poet's birthday, is widely celebrated as Burns Night, where his works are often recited and his life remembered. One of those works, perhaps the most famous and the one we'll be hearing in full tonight, is Tam O'Shanter. This epic narrative poem follows the exploits of the eponymous Tam, who is getting foul and unco happy, that's to say a little bit too tipsy, in a tavern after a long day at market. Finishing his drinking, he mounts his redoubtable horse Meg and rides home across the Ayrshire countryside. But his ride is cut short when he arrives at the Alloway Kirk, or church. On approaching the church, he witnesses another worldly dance taking place inside, involving witches and demons, all overseen by the devil himself playing the bagpipes. His subsequent discovery and the pursuit across the countryside make for a memorable and thrilling denouement, and Keith will be treating us to a full performance in the original Scots a little later on. Now, though, I'll hand you over to our curator, Emma Stead, who will introduce the connections between Robert Burns and the Royal Collection. Thank you, Emma.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you for that wonderful introduction, Chris. And thank you all for joining us tonight to talk about Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet, with relevance to some of the works in the Royal Collection, including a very special chair that you can see part of on your screen just now, which is on display here in the Great Gallery in the Palace of Holyroodhouse. And my colleague Chris has given you an introduction as to Burns, his life and work. And for those of you who may not be of Scottish origin, you should know that we're looking forward to celebrating Burns Night on the 25th of January, the poet's birthday. Burns Night is traditionally celebrated by singing, dancing, bagpipe music, storytelling, and of course, eating haggis, neeps, and tatties. Traditionally, this is in the form of a Burns supper, which includes haggis, whiskey, and recitals of Burns poetry. And in formal suppers, the haggis is usually played in by a bagpiper, whilst all the guests stand, and the host then traditionally recites Burns's address to a haggis before carving it open. The first Edinburgh edition of Burns's Poems Chiefly in the Scottish Dialect, printed by William Smellie in April 1787. Due to the popularity of Burns's Kilmarnock edition of the previous year, the printing of the Edinburgh edition saw an initial print run of 1,500 increase to 3,000 copies. Dedicated to the ladies and gentlemen of the Caledonian Hunt, the collection saw Burns include 17 additional poems and 5 new songs. It also contained a 24-page glossary of Scots dialect words. While Poems was being printed, Smellie noticed he did not have enough copies to supply each of the over 2,000 subscribers, and due to a shortage of type, the blocks had to be reset to complete the run. This second impression was done at speed, and as a result, several typographic errors found their way into the text. The most notable could be found in the ode to a haggis, Burns's ode to Scotland's national dish, where the Scots word skinking, meaning thin and watery, was mistakenly substituted for stinking. This error was found in around 1,000 copies of the edition, and when the London edition was being prepared later that year, one of the Edinburgh books containing it was used to inform the publishers, and thus the mistake became perpetuated. And the Royal Library's copy of poems is from this Edinburgh's skinking edition, as you can see in the final paragraph. There are, of course, lots of volumes of Burns poetry in the Royal Collection, but I'd like to talk to you briefly about the four miniature volumes of poetry by Burns in the Doll's House in Windsor Castle. Queen Mary's Doll's House, one of the most beautiful and famous doll's houses in the world, was created between 1921 and 1924 as a gift for Queen Mary, wife of King George V. The Queen was a great collector of art and had a particular fondness for miniature objects. The renowned architect Sir Edwin Lutyens designed the doll's house and oversaw every aspect of its fitting, furnishing, and decoration, including strict adherence to the correct scale of 1 inch to a foot or 2.5 centimetres to 30.5 centimetres. The library within the doll's house is formed of 595 miniature books, of which 176 are manuscripts, handwritten contributions from many of the most significant literary figures of the day. Some of these were manuscripts specially written by prominent British and Irish authors, but many were printed books published during the 18th and 19th centuries and donated to the doll's house. And the four tiny volumes of Burns poetry are perfectly integrated into the library collection. The tartan-covered book on the right, for instance, is a copy of the first edition of 1786. The publisher, David Bryce of Glasgow, was a prolific producer of miniature books, which he made by photographing down full-size books. Robert Burns famously had a brief but intense affair with Mary Campbell, better known as Highland Mary, in 1786. She is the subject of 3 of his poems, The Highland Lassie O, Highland Mary, and To Mary in Heaven. Mary was originally from Dunoon, but her family moved to Campbelltown when she was 8. She was a native Gaelic speaker, but also spoke English with a pronounced lilt. When she moved to Ayrshire for work in 1786, it was her accent when speaking English that earned her the nickname Highland Mary. It was there that she and Burns met, but she died shortly after their affair had begun. Burns was deeply affected by her death, and he wrote about it in the song Highland Mary. But oh, fell death's untimely frost that nipped my flower so early. Now greens the sod and colds the clay that wraps my Highland Mary. There are 2 sculptures in the Royal Collection which depict Highland Mary, and both of these were collected by Queen Victoria. The affair between Robert Burns and Highland Mary was popularised in the 19th century and became appealing to the Romantic Victorians because it combined elements of a tragic real story that had turned into national myth and legend. This first group of 2 figures in white biscuit or Parian ware depicts Burns and Highland Mary and was purchased by Queen Victoria at the Dublin exhibition in 1853. Parian ware is a form of porcelain that was intended to imitate carved marble and was used to make affordable, scaled-down reproductions of works of art. The group is after a painting by Thomas Fayed in Kelvingrove Art Museum and Gallery in Glasgow. It shows the couple sitting together under a tree, Burns leaning into Mary. Her downcast eyes and clasped hands suggest a certain demureness, but her unbuttoned dress points towards their physical relationship. And the second sculpture depicting Highland Mary was presented to Queen Victoria by Prince Albert on her birthday, the 24th of May, 1853. He had commissioned the full-length sculpture from Benjamin Edward Spence as a birthday gift for his wife. And just as an aside, I'm going to share this watercolour view of the birthday table set up for Queen Victoria's 34th birthday in 1853, decorated with floral garlands and laden with gifts. The decorations in the room include the initials of the royal children, either side of the V&A monogram on the cloth hanging in front of the table. Victoria and Albert commissioned and collected many watercolours throughout their marriage, documenting aspects of their public and private lives together, including a sequence of watercolours depicting the temporary birthday tables created on the occasion of the Queen's birthday, the 24th of May. By the second decade of her married life, these birthday tables included more and more elaborate decorations. On her birthday in 1856, the Queen recorded that the room was most tastefully decorated and arranged in quite a new way. The gilt cages with doves and the flags had a charming effect. The sculpture of Highland Mary is sadly not captured in the watercolour view, but it was painted separately by Roberts, the same artist. Souvenirs connected to Burns were popular during his own life and beyond, and increasingly so during the 19th century. Wooden souvenirs with a direct connection to Burns's life were highly sought after by Burns enthusiasts and general Victorian collectors. This large octagonal larchwood box from the mid-19th century commemorates Robert Burns, with 8 large and 8 small Modlin-style applied cut-out engravings on the top, and a similarly applied 16 scenes around the sides, depicting scenes associated with Burns's life and works. The central image is after the Alexander Naismith portrait of Burns painted in 1787, and this box is very large, it's over 50 centimetres in diameter. And by comparison, this small marquetry box, 9 centimetres wide at its largest point, is made by the excellently named Daniel Craig, and it was probably given by Walter Scott to George IV on his visit to Edinburgh in 1822. And Scott had, of course, met Burns in 1787. The lid is inlaid with various timbers from trees associated with Scottish history and mythology, and the yew in the centre, for instance, comes from a tree under which Mary Queen of Scots and Henry Lord Darnley were supposedly betrothed. There's also oak from Alloway Kirk and Burns's trysting tree. The base has a transfer print of the music and lyrics to Auld Lang Syne. Now, I've just mentioned Alloway Kirk. Burns's masterpiece poem, Tam O'Shanter, written in November 1790, is set there for much of the poem. The premise is, as Chris has said, that a man named Tam is coming back from market drunk when he notices that the church windows are lit up. On going and peeping in the window, he sees a hellish feast occurring inside, with witches and warlocks dancing and the devil himself playing bagpipes. Tam sees a very pretty young witch and exclaims aloud, and they spot him and give chase. And in the ensuing chaos, Tam gets away, but his poor horse Meg has her tail pulled off. And as a very special treat for us tonight, my colleague Keith is now going to perform this wonderful poem, Tam O'Shanter, for us.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Tam O'Shanter, a tale. When chapman billies leave the street and drouthy neighbours meet, as market days are wearing late and folk begin to tack the gate, while we sit boozing at the nappy and getting fou and unca happy, we think now on the lang Scots miles, the mosses, water, slaps and stiles that lie atween us and our hame, where sits our sulking, sullen dame, gathering our brows like gathering storm and nursing our wrath to keep it warm. This truth found honest Tam O'Shanter as he ain nicht the air did canter, all there from there a tune surpasses for honest men and bonny lasses. Ah, Tam, hadst thou but been sae wise as ta'en thy ain wife Kate's advice, she telled thee well thou was a skellum, a blethering, blustering, drunken blellum, fae November till October, ain market day there wasna sober. The ilka milder with a miller, thou sat as lang as thou had siller, that every nag was card a shoe on, the smith and thee get roaring fou on. That at the Lord's house, even on Sunday, thou drank with Kirkton Jean till Monday. She prophesied that late or soon thou would be found deep drowned in Doon, or catched with warlocks in the mirk by Alloway's old haunted kirk. Gentle dames, it gars me greet to think how mony counsels sweet, how mony lengthened sage advices the husband fae the wife despises. But, to our tale, ain market nicht, Tam get planted uncorrect, fast by an ingle bleezing finely, with Reman swats that drank divinely. And at his elbow, Suitor Johnny, his ancient, trusty, drouthy crony, Tam loved him like a very brother. They had been fou for weeks together. The night drave on with sangs and clatter, and aye, the ale was growing better. The landlady and Tam grew gracious, with secret favours, sweet and precious. The suitor told his queerest stories. The landlord's laugh was ready chorus. The wind without might rare and rustle. Tam didn't mind the storm a whistle. Care, mad to see a man sae happy, even drooned himself among the nappy, as bees flee hame with lades of treasure, the minutes winged their way with pleasure. The kings may be blessed, but Tam was glorious, o'er all the ills of life, victorious. But pleasures are like poppies spread. You seize the flower, its bloom is shed, or like the snow falls in the river, a moment white, then melts forever. Or like the borealis race that flit ere you can point their place, or like the rainbow's lovely form, evanishing amid the storm. Nae man can tether time nor tide. The hour approacheth Tam on ride. That hour, a nicht's black arch the key stain, that dreary hour he mounts his beast in. And sic a nicht he taks the road in, as ne'er poor sinner was abroad. The wind blew at her blawn its last. The doubling showers rose on the blast. The speedy gleams the darkness swallowed. Loud, deep and lang, the thunder bellowed. That night, a child might understand that the deal had business on his horn. Wheel mounted on his grey mare Meg, a better never lifted leg, Tam skelpit on through dub and mire, despising wind and rain and fire, was hodding fast his good blue bonnet, whilst crooning o'er some old Scot sonnet, and whilst glowering round with prudent cares, lest bogles catch him unawares. Kirk of Alloway was drawing nigh, for ghasts and hoolits nichtly cry. By this time he was across the ford, where in the snaw the chapman smored. Past the birks and Meeklestane, where drunken Charlie Brack's neck bane, through the whins and by the cane, where hunters found the murdered bairn, and by the thorn aboon the well, where Mungo's mither hanged hersel. Afore him Doon pours all his floods. The rattling storm roars through the woods. The lightnings flash frae pole to pole, near and more near the thunders roll. When, glimmering through the groaning trees, Kirk of Alloway seemed in a bleeze. Through Ilka the beams were glancing, loud resounded mirth and dancing. Inspiring bald John Barleycorn, what dangers thou canst mak us scorn. Wi' Tiffany we'll fear nae evil, wi' Whiskey we'll face the deal. The swat sae reamed in Tammy's noddle, fair play he cardna deals a boddle. But Maggie stood richt sair astonished, till by the heel and horn admonished, she ventured forward on the licht. Vow, Tam saw an unco sight. Witches and warlocks in a dance, nae cotillon brent new fae France, but hornpipes, jigs, strathspeys and reels put life and metal in their heels. A winnock bunker in the east, there sat Old Nick in shape the beast, a toozy, tight, black, grim and large. To gie them music was his charge. He screwed the pipes and gat them skirl, till roof and rafters all did dirl. Coffins stood round like open presses, and shawed the deed in their last dresses. By some dealish cantrip slight, each in its cauld horn held a licht, by which heroic Tam was able to note upon the hally table a murderer's banes and gibbet earns, twa span-lang wee unchristened bairns, a thief new cutted fae the rape, wi' his last gasp his gab did gape, 5 tomahawks wi' blood red rusted, 5 scimitars wi' murder crusted, a garter which a babe had strangled, a knife a father's throat had mangled, whom his ain son a life bereft, the grey hairs yet stuck to the heft, and mair horrible and awful, which even to name would be unlawful. And as Tammy stood, amazed and curious, the mirth and fun grew fast and furious. The piper loud and louder blew, the witches quick and quicker flew. They reeled, they set, they crossed, they cleekit, till ilka carlet swat and reek it, coosed her duddies tae the wark, and link it at it in her sark. Now Tam, oh Tam, had they been quines, oh plump and strapping in their teens, their sarks instead of creasy flan and been snow white 1700 linen. These breeks of mine, my only pair that ains were plush of good blue hair, I would have had them aff my hurdies for ain blink of the bonny birdies. But withered beldams, auld and droll, rig woody hag would span a foal, leaping and flinging on a crummock, I wonder didn't turn thy stomach. But Tam kenned what was what foo brawly. There was ane winsome wench in Whalley that nicht enlisted on the corps, lang after Kent on Carrick shore. For mony a beast to dead she shot, and perished mony a bonny boat, and shook baith meikle corn and bear, and kept the countryside in fear. Her cutty sark, a paisley hand that while a lassie she had worn, in longitude though sorely scanty, it was her best, and she was vaunty. Little kenned thy reverend granny, that sark she coughed for her wee nanny, with twa pund Scots, 'twas all her riches, would ever graced a dance in witches. But here, my muse, her wine maun cure, sick flighter, far beyond her power to say how nanny, lap and flang, a supple jawed she was and strang, and how Tam gazed like ane bewitched, and thought his very ain enriched. Even Satan glowered and fidged foo fain, and hotched and blew wi' micht and main, till first ane caper, syne another, Tam tint his reason all together and roars it, "Well done, cutty sark!" And in an instant, all was dark. And scarcely had he Maggie rallied, when out the hellish legion sallied. As bees bizzoot wi' angry fyke, when plundering herds assail their bike, as open pussy's mortal foes, when pop she starts afore their nose, as eager runs the market crowd, when catch the thief resounds aloud, so Maggie runs the witch's folly, with mony an eldritch screech and holly. Oh Tam, thou'll get thy faring. In hell they'll roast thee like a herring. In vain thy Kate awaits thy coming. Kate soon will be a wafer woman. Now, do thy speedy utmost, Meg, and win the keystane i' the brig. There at them thou thy tail may toss. A running stream they dare not cross. But afore the keystane she could make, the fainted tail she had to shake. For Nanny, far afore the rest, hard upon noble Maggie pressed, and flew at Tam with furious ettle. But little wist she Maggie's mettle. Ane spring brought aff her master hale, but left behind her ain grey tail. The carlin clocht her by the rump, and left poor Maggie scarce a stump. Now, what this tale of truth shall read, ilk man and mother's son tak heed. Whene'er to drink ye are inclined, or cutty sarks run in your mind, think you may buy the joys our dear. Remember Tam O'Shanter's mare.
Bravo, Keith. Thank you so much. I always really enjoy listening to Keith perform, and I hope that really brought the spirit of Burns alive for you all at home. Now, I'd just like to begin to give a closer inspection to the wonderful chair that was just beside Keith there whilst he was performing. This is the Tam O'Shanter chair, one of my favourite objects on display here at the Palace. It was made in 1822 by John Underwood, a cabinet maker based in Ayr, with timber taken from Alloway Kirk. And the ruined church is, as you've heard, the setting for the poem Tam O'Shanter. Now, Robert Burns, as a boy, was very well acquainted with the kirk. He was born in Alloway and lived nearby until he was 7 years old. The church was a ruin within Burns's own lifetime, and creating Burns-themed souvenirs from its timbers was popular. The cult of Burns-related collecting could be seen as an early manifestation of the Romantic movement. After his death, biographers were quick to publish memoirs, but tributes were of course not only literary in form. Others began to collect mementos of the man, not just personal objects, but also pieces of timber from places where the poet had been. And for me, this juxtaposition of the object being made from its own subject matter is just endlessly fascinating. Now, the chair in the Royal Collection is actually the second chair made by John Underwood from the roof timbers, with the poem inscribed on the back on the brass panels. The first was made in 1818 for the 12th Earl of Eglinton, himself an important patron of Burns during his own lifetime. He was attempting to create an antiquarian interior in his own home, which had been recently rebuilt in the Gothic style. The house was therefore a suitably romantic setting for one of the first antiquarian-style chairs created to form a tribute to a literary or historical figure, and that chair was sold by Sotheby's in New York in 1992. But the chair in the Royal Collection was presented to George IV in 1822, the year of his visit to Scotland. It was an occasion imbued with great significance, as it was the first visit by a monarch since that of Charles II in 1650 for his Scottish coronation, and the first since the Act of Union joined the Parliaments of England and Scotland in 1707 to create the United Kingdom. The visit, which became known as the King's Jaunt, followed on from the immensely popular tours in 1821 of the King's other outlying kingdoms, Ireland and Hanover. So from the 15th to the 29th of August 1822, George IV visited Edinburgh. This royal visit, which was caricatured as 1 in 20 daft days, had the effect of increasing goodwill towards the monarchy and resulted in a newfound Scottish national identity, uniting Highlander and Lowlander in sharing the iconic symbolism of tartans and kilts. And the most important man in arranging the visit was the Scottish writer, scholar, and antiquarian Sir Walter Scott, who is often described as having stage managed the entire visit. Now, Walter Scott had dined with the Prince Regent, later George IV, at Clarence House in 1815. This portrait, commissioned by George IV at a cost of 300 guineas, was begun in London in 1820 and completed in time to be exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1827. By this stage, Scott was already a well-established writer. He had published Waverley, and he had also discovered the honours of Scotland, or the Scottish Crown Jewels, at Edinburgh Castle in 1818. He had also attended the King's coronation in London in 1821 and had been deeply impressed and inspired by the richness and historical nature of the ceremonial. Once the visit to Edinburgh had been confirmed, Scott's advice was sought, and with only 3 weeks' notice, he was invited by the Lord Provost of Edinburgh to organise the event. During the 2-week-long extravaganza, Scott stage-managed a series of spectacular ceremonies designed to demonstrate George IV as a legitimate king, presented as the latest in a long line of Scottish monarchs, heir to both the Hanoverians and the Jacobites, of a country with a distinctive and unified Highland identity, as emphasised by Scott himself. "We are the clan and our king is the chief." Scott was famed for his novels, which recreated a romantic view of Scotland's past, and he seized the opportunity to present the country as a plaided panorama overflowing with tartan and Highlanders. He was an enthusiastic chairman of the Celtic Society, which promoted Highland culture and dress. The wearing of tartan had become more widespread since the lifting of the ban in tartan prescribed during the Jacobite Rising of 1745. And tartan attire was encouraged during the visit, and the king himself was persuaded to order a Highland dress fit for the occasion. This was supplied by George Hunter and Company of Princes Street, Edinburgh, at a cost of £1,354 and 18 shillings. The bill for this is still in the Royal Archives, and it includes 61 yards of royal satin plaid, 31 yards of royal velvet, and 17.5 yards of royal plaid cashmere. The accoutrements worn with this outfit have been carefully preserved and are on display here at the Palace of Holyroodhouse, and they include a dirk, a powder flask, a sword, a belt, and a sash. And the artist of this portrait, Sir David Wilkie, obtained an invitation to the levee held at the palace through Walter Scott, and he wrote to his sister, "The king looked exceedingly well in tartan. He had on the kilt and the hose, with a kind of flesh-coloured pantaloons underneath." George is recorded here in portrait form, depicted looking like a Highland chieftain, although without these flesh-coloured pantaloons. He was actually lampooned for the fact that his kilt was slightly too short, and Lady Hamilton Dalrymple, who was a noted society wit, commented, "Well, since he is to be amongst us for so short a time, the more we see of him, the better." The visit, which was witnessed by 1/7 of the Scottish population, was proclaimed a huge success. Our king has seen his people, and they have seen their king. The king himself was gratified by how well the visit had gone, and departed delighted by Scott's presentation of Scotland as an ancient and traditional clan society designed to heal the rift between Hanoverian monarch and his northern kingdom. George used his own person through his costume, orders, and speeches, even if a little fancifully and romantically, to show himself as a full-blown Highland clan chieftain. He sported the thistle, the national flower, which was strewn liberally through the decorations which surrounded each event. He encouraged the use of local materials and industries to support each event, from the dress of those who were presented to him to the souvenirs of the visits. And this conscious invention of tradition and the making of majesty was considered hugely successful. Walter Scott's conscious orchestration of events began building the idea of a romantic Scotland that still exists today. So some people might say that this begins with the Victorians, but for me, the origins can be traced back to the 1820s, where the seizing of this idea of Scottishness incorporated Robert Burns, Scotland's national poet, and his works with increasing vigour. For me, the Tam O'Shanter chair encapsulates this idea that the story of the history of the nation cannot be told without reference to its rich literary tradition, beginning with Robert Burns and then with Walter Scott continuing his legacy, which continues to this day. And on the basis of this, it's entirely appropriate that George IV was presented with this chair on his visit in 1822. In a Gothic style, carved with thistles and with brass panels engraved with the full poem Tam O'Shanter, its explicit Scottishness heralded a new form of furniture making connected with the development of historical mementos. An inscription on the back of the chair denotes that no other chair could now be made from the roof timbers of Alloway Kirk. And this corresponds with the fact that by the second half of the 19th century, the search for relic timber associated with Burns had reached a fever pitch. The southwest of Scotland was the 19th century location for developing Scottish flavoured historical mementos such as maudlin ware. The juxtaposition of Scottish-themed souvenirs, coupled with George IV and Queen Victoria's presentations of themselves as Scottish monarchs, or at the very least having a very close affinity for the nation, cannot be divorced from the incorporation of Burns's work and his firm ascension into today's place as Scotland's national poet. Wherever you're tuning in from tonight, I hope you've enjoyed this dive into Burns in the Royal Collection, and I'd like to take this early opportunity to wish you a very happy Burns night.
Thank you so much, Emma, for that absolutely fascinating insight into Burns and the Royal Collection. I found the Highland Mary statue gifted to Queen Victoria and by Prince Albert. I thought that was absolutely fantastic, and the beautiful octagonal box was a beautiful thing as well, and particularly interesting. Obviously, a huge thank you to Keith, that wonderful, incredible recital. We do have some questions from the audience, so I've just got a couple here. So one of the questions I have for Keith was just how long did it take you to learn Tam O'Shanter in that manner? Obviously, you seem to have got a fantastic recollection of it. How long did it take you to memorize it in the way that you have it now?
Excuse me. Probably several months. I started performing it a number of years ago, but it was probably a matter of 5 or 6 months. Someone with a better memory than me could probably do it more quickly or more time available. But I would say probably about up to half a year until I was really happy with being able to perform it in public.
Oh, fantastic. Sorry, I'm going to turn the video off. There we go. I've got one here for Emma as well. And it may also be for you, Keith, as well, but I'll direct it to Emma first. Do we have any record of Burns ever visiting the Palace of Holyroodhouse specifically?
Funny enough, I was thinking about this just this morning. He did become a member of the Royal Company of Archers, which is the ceremonial bodyguard that accompany the monarch when they visit Scotland. And they are based here at the Palace of Holyroodhouse. So it's possible, but there's no record, I'm afraid.
He also does write very kind of praisingly and happily about Edinburgh in at least a couple of poems. In at least one of them, he's very scathing about Edinburgh people, but he's very nice about the city, which suggests at least some degree of connection to it. And obviously, he kind of worked and sold items in Edinburgh as well. So he has a connection to the capital at the very least. But certainly from what Emma's saying, he may have a direct connection to the palace as well.
Wonderful, thank you. I've got another one here as well, which is asking about, more particularly about the Cutty Sark, and is there a connection to the famous ship of the same name? I don't know if you can offer some more on that, Keith.
I assume that the poem is the source of the name. I don't know much about the ship's history, I'm afraid, but I'm guessing that's where it comes from. Burns is the source of a lot of phrases and words in use throughout not just in Scotland, but throughout the English-speaking world in general. Some of which are in Tam O'Shanter, like, for example, Fast and Furious, a term which has ended up as a series of popular action films, and there are various other ones within Tam O'Shanter alone and elsewhere in Burns's works that have come into use around the world.
The Cutty Sark itself, I mean, Burns described it. What is a Cutty Sark, as Burns describes it in the poem?
It's an item of clothing. I'm not sure what the kind of modern equivalent is, really. A kind of lightweight, similar to a nightshirt or something along those lines. Someone else could give you a more proper comparison, but certainly in my head, it's along the lines of a kind of quite lightweight nightshirt made of something like cotton or silk.
Thanks very much, Keith. I've got one here for Emma, and apologies, you may not have awareness of this one, but was Prince Albert, are we aware if Prince Albert was as much of a fan of Burns as Queen Victoria was?
That's a good question. I mean, we know that Prince Albert and Queen Victoria were really interested in Scottish literature. You know, they were reading aloud to each other. Queen Victoria was actually reading a volume of Scott poetry to Prince Albert when he passed away. So I think it's a safe assumption to say that they really had so many shared interests. And I think the fact that he commissioned this statue of Highland Mary as a birthday gift would indicate that he, you know, had a really strong knowledge of Burns' poetry. I mean, you know, if my husband's listening to this, I'm very, very open to taking statues as birthday presents and watercolors of the entire birthday table. I'm very, very happy to accept that.
I've got another one here for Keith, actually. And someone asks, do you think people get a better understanding of Burns when they hear his poetry being performed in the manner you have done, as opposed to just reading it? Do you think the meaning is conveyed in a better manner?
I think so. In a similar way that you can read just about any great work of literature off the page. You know, I'm unfortunate enough that I can only do it in a couple of languages, so I don't know exactly what it's like reading Cervantes or Goldoni off the page compared to hearing it. But certainly, yeah, I think Burns' works really come alive when they're properly performed, rather than they're good to read. You get some semblance of the man's artistry, his sense of like rhythm is the word that I always say is what makes Tam O'Shanter great. Particularly the middle sections are my favourite. Yeah, you can certainly enjoy a lot of great works of literature just by reading them. But I think most great pieces like Tam O'Shanter really come alive if they're performed in some manner, ideally by someone more skilled than me. But if you've got someone who can do it really well, it really takes a great work of some kind to another level.
Well, I think you're being very unfair, Keith. I think it was an absolutely fantastic performance. I do have another question here for you, and I think it's a fairly obvious one, but I would very much like to know the answer myself. What's your favourite Burns poem, and what's your favourite Burns poem to perform? I
mean, it's an easy answer. It probably is Tam O'Shanter. I'm also a great lover of the Twa Dugs, which is, for anyone unfamiliar, quite a similar poem of a similar length that tells the story of two dogs from different classes of society who meet up, have a great discussion about life, the universe, and everything, and essentially just conclude that they're really happy they're dogs because people are idiots. But I like some of his shorter works, and even some of his really short works, like his wonderfully scathing, not epigrams, epitaphs. The one about, what's his name? James Laird of Boghead. Here lies Boghead amang the deed, would like to make salvation, but if sicken he in heaven may be, then heaven, then give me instead damnation, something along those lines. He's capable of being just wonderfully, scathing about people. In that particular case, the man wasn't even dead, but he thought he'd write his epitaph anyway. Lord Byron, of course, comes a wee bit after Burns, writes some wonderful epitaphs as well. And I've often wondered if he got some of the ideas from Burns, of whom he was certainly recorded as an admirer. So yes, Tam O'Shanter #1, but obviously there are huge numbers of fabulous poems and songs of different lengths that different people can enjoy depending on their preferences.
Thank you very much, Keith. I've got another one here for you, Emma. And again, it might be quite a difficult one to answer, but do you think Queen Victoria had much of an understanding of Scots beyond the Burns that she was consuming?
In terms of the Scots language, I've always been interested in this because, of course, you know, she travels around Scotland quite profusely. Of course, mostly goes to Balmoral in Aberdeenshire. She certainly would have understood the Scottish accent, and I assume that some of that also comes with the way that the dialect would be written down. Yeah, I've never researched that specifically, I have to say. But yeah, really interesting question.
And again, kind of carrying up from what you said during the talk about the southwest of Scotland kind of becoming a hotbed of the creation of objects. How popular were the objects that were being created that were being inspired by birds? Was there an English market for them? Were they specifically for a Scottish market, or were they particularly for an English market?
I think it's easy to answer that, actually. I think you would say that they were created for a tourist market, which obviously would primarily have comprised of British people visiting these areas. My assumption is that they were mostly English, but I'm very happy to be corrected than that.
There is another one here, and this is probably a very quick answer. Did Queen Victoria like haggis?
Probably. She liked most foods. I mean, I like haggis. I think it's delicious. So I think it's a fairly safe assumption that Queen Victoria did like haggis.
That's good enough for me. Is there any record of Burns's attitude towards the monarchy? Do we know how he felt in terms of his political views? Because I know he had some quite strong social and political views. Sorry, Emma, I should have said that.
Sorry, that's a question for me.
I'll direct it to you first, then we'll direct it to you.
I'm afraid this would be much better directed at Keith. I don't have a specific answer for this, I'm afraid.
It's quite difficult to determine the political views of a poet, even an exceptional one like Burns, from their works, because in a lot of cases they are writing directly or indirectly for money. They've either been commissioned to create a particular piece, or they're writing something that they want to become popular as part of a collection. During various political events in Scotland over the last 25 years, there has been a great deal of use of quotations from Burns to try to claim him for one political agenda or another, from all sides, not any particular one. And in a lot of cases, there's some extreme cherry picking of a particular line. This makes, he's clearly a diehard monarchist, or he's clearly a diehard Republican, or any other movement within Scottish politics, saying that he's definitely very like pro-Scottish independence, or he's definitely a hardcore unionist. you cannot tell something like this from somebody who lived over 200 years ago, and whose views on such matters within his poetry could change from poem to poem depending on exactly who he was writing for. So I don't think we certainly can't make any concrete assumptions about Burns's political or constitutional preferences of any kind from the things he's written. And I'm not aware of a great deal of biographical evidence one way or another either. So I think Burns is quite simply an outstanding poet whose works anybody can enjoy, whatever their views on monarchy, constitutions, or other major important events in Scotland today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Keith. That concludes the question and answer session and this evening's event. We hope you've enjoyed this event and you will join us again in the future. In the chat, you'll find a link to an evaluation form, and your feedback is vital to help us make the programme as good as it possibly can be. So we'd be very, very grateful if you took a moment to complete it. There'll also be in a QR code in the presentation that appears at the end. Also in that closing presentation, you'll see a slide which shows our forthcoming digital events programme. So if you've enjoyed this evening, please consider joining us for one of those in the near future. There's also going to be a link dropped into the chat. All that's left for me to say is thank you again for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed this evening and hope we will see you again in the future. Thank you very much.